Hello and welcome to our tutorial about balancing chemical equations, and we have some golden rules about balancing chemical equations that are really important, so let's get on with it. We're going to look at what are equations for, why is it important to balance an equation, what's the layout, how do we write it, and what are those golden rules. So firstly, what are equations for? What's a chemical equation for? Well, it tells us the reactants that started a reaction, the reactants we used in a reaction. It tells us what the products of that reaction are, and it tells us the ratio of the reactants to each other and of the reactants to the products as well. So we can work out how much product to expect or how much reactant we'll need to make so much product. So what is a balanced equation? Well, there's something called the law of conservation of mass, which basically says that no atoms can be destroyed, no atoms can be created, and no atoms can be changed from one element to another. What's that mean? So it means the equation, our balanced equation, needs to have the same number of atoms of each element on each side of the equation. In other words, on the reactant side and on the product side. And an unbalanced chemical equation is just nonsense. We're not going to get any marks in an exam or even in your homework for writing unbalanced equations. We need to work this one out. So why balance? Well, because that will correctly define the reaction. It shows what's actually happening in the test tube, in the beaker, in the whatever. And it will enable us to make the correct calculations about quantities of product or reactant. If we haven't got a balanced equation, we can't do that. So how do we write out an equation? What's the layout for doing so? So we write the reactants on the left. We have an arrow from left to right. That's showing the direction of our reaction, and then the products on the right. So a generic reaction equation would look rather like this. So we'd have reactants on the left here, an arrow in the middle pointing to the right, and then the products here on the right. Here's an example. We have an equation here between hydrochloric acid, sodium hydroxide, and they make sodium chloride and water. We can see on the left side, on the reactant side, we have 2 hydrogen atoms. And on the product side, we have 2 hydrogen atoms in the water here. On the reactant side, we have 1 oxygen. And on the product side, also 1 oxygen. On the reactant side, 1 chlorine, and also 1 on the product side. And 1 sodium on the reactant side, and 1 on the product side. So that's a balanced equation. So our golden rules are, for balancing equations, we must have the correct reactants and products in the equation. We can make sure we find those out. In other words, we must reflect what's really involved in the reaction. What is reacting with what? We need everything in terms of reactants and products. And we can't add any in, and we can't leave any out. And it's really important, this is what I consider the key golden rule, we must use the correct formula for each substance. We can't alter formula or make up formula because it might make a balancing step a bit easier. We just have to use what the formula really is. And once the formula for something is known, once we've found it out, we can't alter it. Once we have that, once we've written those down, we can balance the equation, and we use algebra to do that. In other words, we just balance up the number of each letter, each element. And then we can only change the quantities of each substance when we're doing this. In other words, the big numbers in front of each substance. We can't change the formula itself. So in summary, chemical equations reflect what happens in a reaction. They show the reactants, their products, and the ratio between these. We need to know that atoms are not created or destroyed or changed, so our reactants and product sides must balance with each other. And unbalanced equations have no value. They're not going to get us any marks ever. So what we're going to do in the next tutorial, well, we're going to take this a little step further. We're going to do a walkthrough of some examples of balancing equations. So I'll speak to you then.